Hello, my fellow chess players. This is Oleksiyenko speaking. And today I wanted to share with you one of my recent games that I played in March this year in Bundesliga Süd against grandmaster Saric Ante. It turned out to be a great game, of course with the help of the opponent. It turned out to be short and good. Usually it is very difficult to play an instructive game without significant help of your opponent, so I appreciate that. So here we go. I was white, we've got French defense, and I usually choose knight d2 here. c5, the most principal line in my opinion. Knight g to f3, cd, one of the possibilities for black. Knight takes d4. If you will, I can explain every single of my moves, right? So I put pawns in the center, I protected the pawn and developed my knight. I develop another knight, it's a capture. Knight goes to f6, e takes d5 is the main line, exchanging pawns. That day I decided to go e5 and close the center. This is considered not to be the main line. Knight goes to d7, and here I chose bishop to b5. Bishop to b5, knight second to f3 is another line. I have to move the piece again in the opening, which you're not supposed to do, but well, the pawn was hanging. So I either give up my white squared bishop or move knight again, but that would be a different story. I chose knight bishop to b5. So ideally, white would like to keep that white squared bishop because it is a good bishop. There are no pawns fixed on white squares, and it has big potential on this diagonal to give checkmate to black king. On the other hand, black would really like to get rid of his white squared bishop, which is not happening in this game, because it is completely restricted by its own pawns that are fixed in the center. So I had to, well, sacrifice positionally my white squared bishop. My opponent played a6, bishop takes d7, and bishop takes d7. Castle, knight goes to c6, offering an exchange and attacking my pieces. I don't want to help him improve his pawn structure with capture. If I take, he may take with a pawn, and then he would have a nice center. I don't like it. And two bishops. So I played knight second to f3. So actually engines prefer black here, or give zeros if you give it time to think, I think. But the point I was trying to make is that I know this position a little bit better than my opponent. He definitely did not expect this one. I know what to do, so it compensates for, well, to not getting advantage, to put it mildly. So actually now black is playing on dark squares. We don't have a white squared bishop, that's too bad, but we still have dark squares and we control them really well in the center. So my opponent developed the bishop. c3, a good solid move to support the center. I could have played another move like rook e1, but c3 was in my plan. And my opponent played rook c8. Rook c8. Castling was definitely a good alternative, but that would be another story. He had a different plan in mind. He puts the rook on c8, which is semi-open file, makes sense. And I play rook e1. One may call it overprotecting this pawn in a case if black ever thinks about f6. Well, he shouldn't. My pieces are ready. And my opponent played knight a5, which is an official novelty in this position. So what do I do? What do I do in this position? I guess that my opponent is postponing castle for a reason. He doesn't, although without white squared bishop there is not too much danger for the king, but he postponed castle. Castle was a very logical move to play. He doesn't do that. What does he want? Anyway, I played here a4. On one hand, you're not supposed to push pawns where you're weaker, but on the other hand, I intervene with his plans to go b5 if he ever was thinking about pawn minority attack. I'm ready, my rook on a1 would become very active then. So I stop his idea, and I also had another very deep idea here, strategical idea in my pocket. So not only I stop b5, or not stop, but well, really intervene with his plans. I also have different idea, which you'll discover shortly. My opponent played h5 here, which in my opinion is an inaccuracy. It weakens the g5 square. I thought that he would go g5 in this position. I was considering that was his idea. That's a typical idea to attack white center. The problem is white center is rock solid and g5 is not that good. They usually attack the center if moving the knight from f3 would collapse the center, which is not the case. So I thought g5 was an idea, so I was planning to go h3, and if black goes h5, I was not sure what to do. I was even considering moves like g4, which is strategically very risky because I moved the pawn away from my king, but I stop his g4, pawn on g5 becomes weak, and I can attack it in the nearest future. I was concerned that long diagonal may open, so I was not sure if I'm gonna play g4 here. I had other alternatives. But to my surprise, my opponent played h5, and here I played the following move, queen to d2. Queen to d2. I see the weakness on... My apologies. I see the weakness. The square on g5 is weak, and he wants to play g5. So with move queen to d2, I stop his g5, and potentially I have ideas like queen f4, queen g3, and bishop to g5. First of all, attacking g7 and exchanging dark squared bishop. By the way, a good question to ask yourself at any point in a closed, not too dynamic position. Which pieces would I like to exchange and which ones I would like to keep? That's a difficult question to answer, but if you ask it and you have decent positional background, it would be very beneficial for you. So in this case, I would really like these two bishops to disappear from the chessboard, because my bishop is not that good. It is restricted by its own pawns. His bishop is excellent. It's controlling weak squares here and, well, maybe there a little bit if he plays b5 in the future. So exchanging dark squared bishop would remove his two bishop advantage and weaken his dark squares. So that's why I played queen d2. I want to do something like this, and then maybe bishop to g5. So my opponent plays h4, which I think is another inaccuracy, and I play h3. I automatically fix the pawn here, so that I don't want him to go h3 and weaken all white squares around my king. So I go h3. Why h4 is the bad move? Because it weakens another square. Now there are two weaknesses here, and I'm not sure what black has gained. Well, he's trying to claim, he played rook to h5, that he develops the rook like that. But I don't really mind that. So here I thought, okay, there's no way I'm going to exchange bishop from here right now. But there's another diagonal where I can catch him, and that's this diagonal. That is why I played the following move, b3. b3 in this position. I take over the c4 square, just in case he wanted to jump there. I do weaken the c3 pawn, but I had that covered. And I'm gonna play bishop h3, and the bishop will get removed because he cannot escape this exchange, because I would just penetrate to d6. My opponent played queen c7, attacking my pawn, and I played rook to e3. By the way, I have seen this idea in several AlphaZero's games against Stockfish. AlphaZero often had, well, I wouldn't say similar, but it had a pawn on d4 instead of b file, and the pawn on c3 was weak. Maybe I'll show some of those games later on my channel. And c3 is the only weakness. Rook goes to e3, and it's ready to go to the king side and supporting the weak pawn. So I knew this idea, and it was easy to find for me. Rook to e3, and now my opponent, still not. Sorry about that. So my opponent played bishop to c5. Bishop to c5, which turned out to be an inaccuracy. He cannot really stop my bishop a3, so I go bishop a3. I go bishop a3 in this position. I thought that his idea might have been to go b6, and if I take, he takes with the pawn and claims advantage, even wins some material. But the problem is the pawn on a6 is not protected, the rook on h5 is not protected. I have all sorts of moves like queen e2, and then I attack his pawn on a6, and if he simply protects it, that's a really bad situation, because I go b4, forking the two pieces. Bishop has to take on d4, knight takes d4, and unfortunate double attack from my opponent, and I win material. So I'm not sure if that was his idea, to go b6, it just doesn't work. By the way, after b6, you have to see the problems in black position. a6 pawn is unprotected, rook on h5 is unprotected, and these two pieces are in forking distance of the pawn. That's it, and white has advantage after queen e2. So my opponent played knight to b3. He didn't like his position so much that he decided to go for complications, which were you supposed to do if you have a bad position, to complicate stuff. But it turned out to be, my apologies, turned out to be a, well, positional blunder. Knight takes b3, bishop takes e3, queen takes e3. For sure he had planned queen takes c3 to suggest an exchange here and there, win 2 pawns. But I go queen b6, which he clearly blundered. My queen penetrates, protects the knight, ready to go to d6 and checkmate the guy, and attacks the pawn if anyone cares. And rook c1 is coming. Black is just collapsing here. I'm sure he had blundered queen b6. f6 could not have been his idea, to give up 2 pieces for rook and pawn and do this. So I already knew that my position was winning. So I had a positional advantage. My opponent tried to escape but failed, and now it was time to crush him. So here there are plenty of winning lines, but I really like the one I chose. With every single move I improve some of my pieces and create immediate threats. So I considered all sorts of moves here, like e takes f6, rook to e1, some other moves, but I decided with every move I'm gonna bring all my pieces to the center, to the attack, and then there would be a combination. So I went knight to c5. Knight goes to amazing square, attacking here, here, and there, and stopping queen c3. My opponent plays f takes e5, and well, this isn't checkers. I play rook to b1, my rook comes into play. So I did sacrifice a pawn for initiative, but his pieces are so discoordinated that his position will collapse. So now all of my pieces are in the game. My opponent played b5, trying to close the b file. And now I go knight g5, yet another move as a knight. My pieces just smoothly go into his position. The pawn on e6 is hanging, which is the main problem in his position. And there are all sorts of queen at some point would just penetrate black's position. He went e4, and now it's time for a combination. I took a takes b5. He took with the bishop. If he takes with the pawn, I can do anything here. For example, taking on e6 would collapse his position. He took with the bishop on b5, and knight c to e6. He moved his queen to the center, and then nice final combination. Rook takes b5. I need to remove that defender. A takes b5, queen a7. All my pieces are in. The checkmate here and here is threatening. Queen f6 is the only move, and after knight g7, a mate would come shortly. So that was it. That was the game I wanted to show you. It has nice positional aspects, as well as open dynamic play and the final combination. I hope you enjoyed and learned. Take care, subscribe to my channel, share the word about my channel, leave a comment if you're happy or unhappy with what you see or hear. Take care and goodbye.